Well, welcome back to the Pick Six podcast. Sam McKewon along with Evan Bland. I think we took off 12 days. In between, we had a ton of Zoom interviews, and we went to Uzbekistan. Do you know where Uzbekistan is, Evan?
I didn't until I Googled it. It's in Central Asia. It's about a 6,600-mile plane ride from Lincoln. That's what I know. That's what I know. That would be a big extension of the Big Ten footprint if Nebraska starts playing games over there.
They would. Let me mute my Twitter here. Goodbye, Twitter. That was very popular. A very popular comment on Twitter. People weighing in on that. You know, Nebraska has a unique foothold in the football landscape in 2020. They fought very hard for a season to happen, and people are going to be watching more closely than I think people expect. They are. I mean, people are going to watch Nebraska and see how they do. And if Nebraska comes out of this thing and they go 5-3 or 6-2, a lot of people are going to tip their caps in Nebraska. If Nebraska really struggles, I think you're going to see a lot of people try to take it out, unfortunately, on the Huskers' expense. Hey, everybody, I'm Sam McKewon along with Evan Bland. We're here for another edition of the Pick Six podcast. I'm up 3 in the picks. I need to say that at the top, because I'm so rarely in the lead against Evan Bland that I need to shout it from the mountaintops. I beat him again last week. I'm 2-0 in the weeks, and I'm up 3 overall. And so I've got to try to keep that thing going.
TCU let me down.
Yeah, they did. Well, that's about right. And then I had Tennessee. They won late against South Carolina. Those were the 2 games that I needed to win. And I did. And then I think you had the Bills and I had the Rams. So, we'll have a couple of NFL picks again this week, probably for 2 or 3 more weeks. And then we'll go full college once the Big Ten season begins. We're 3 weeks out from Nebraska, Ohio State. Doesn't feel like it. Feels like we're 3 months away from it, but it'll come fast. And it's clearly coming fast for Nebraska, and lots of good stuff from 6 assistants. Yeah, 2 coordinators, 4 assistants, 4 players, and then Scott Frost, who I thought was pretty good today on a Friday. So we've got a lot of material to kind of pick through quickly. I'm sure readers have read some of that stuff, but at the same time, we'll hit some of the high points, talk about offense and defense. Kind of the big week for basketball. You know, one of their highest-rated commits in the recruiting service era, in William Breedenbach, out of Mater Dei High School in California, usually known as a big football power. But in this particular case, they produced a highly rated basketball player, and Nebraska was able to get him away from California and Marquette. So good get for the Huskers. We'll talk a little bit about that. We'll get to the picks eventually, but we'll start with, of course, football. A lot going on just with folks this week, but we don't ever, and I mean ever, want to neglect our sponsor. Team Schwalbach is a family-owned Allstate insurance agency with 4 licensed insurance pros saving thousands of Nebraska Husker fans money. They sell homeowner, auto, life, and flood insurance across Nebraska, and they also insure all the big boy toys. Motorcycles, boats, RVs, off-road vehicles. Get those big boy toy events in before October 24th when the football season begins. If you've had your roof replaced in the last 5 years, give Daryl Schwabach, Kyle Schwabach, Nancy Mostek, or Kyle Murdoch a call at 402-590. They can help you save a bundle. 590-5200, that is. I think we're almost out of hail season. Almost. Free and obligation insurance reviews and quotes going to make sure that all of their fellow Nebraska fans are properly protected. You can contact them at 402-590-5200, 402-590-5200, or www.nebraskaallstate.com, www.nebraskaallstate.com. Thank you to Team Schwalbach for continuing to be a sponsor of the Pick Six podcast. Okay, Evan, Friday, today, Scott Frost talking to us. I'm trying to sound like Gus Johnson, and I can't do that. Frost! Freshman! No, he's not a freshman. He's a junior, I guess, in coaching, right? We want to say condolences to the Frost family and to the extended family of Larry Frost, who passed away a couple of weeks ago on September 16th, I believe, the same day that Big Ten football come back. Former Nebraska football player and, of course, a high school coach all over the country, and the father of Scott Frost. And so Frost talked a little bit about that today, said it was a hard it's been a hard couple of weeks. I'm sure it has been. I have a hard time imagining what it'll be like when I lose my father, and I know that's hard for anybody who does have that experience. So I'm sure Frost has been going through quite a bit, on top of the bureaucratic questions and all the red tape that you've got to go through, the hoops you got to jump through. There's a lot of stuff there, and they talked a little bit about it today, and I guess we'll start there. Evan, there's still some lingering questions out there about schedule, about daily antigen testing cap, and the roster and its depth. And I think the thing that interested me the most was A, the daily testing cap being at 170, and then B, the comment that Frost made that some spots on the roster have had a lot of positive tests and or have tested positive for antibodies, and some positions haven't.
Right. Yeah, that was news. I mean, I don't think we've had an update on the testing situation at Nebraska since June, July, maybe. I mean, it's been a while since we've heard, and
yeah,
Nebraska's made it clear, right, that they're not going to put that stuff out there publicly. But yeah, that was interesting. The limit on the antigen testing is fascinating to me. I mean, it makes sense, I suppose, if you're the Big Ten, that you want to limit teams in what they have. But I find it unusual that a school like Nebraska couldn't make up the difference, right? Like if it wants to test daily another 30 to 40 players that are walk-ons or whatnot, I don't know why you wouldn't be able to do that. Although I suppose that's kind of the argument we've had with a lot of things the Big Ten has laid down, whether that's no fans or when you can go to padded practices. They seem to really value this kind of one size fits all, level playing field sort of deal. So, that was something that Frost said today, obviously, that they're still working through. They'd really like to avoid having to tell those, few dozen guys that they can't participate in this season. So that'll be fascinating. But yeah, I mean, the depth conversation is something that will be ongoing this year, right? I mean, if you have a positive test, you're out for 21 days. That's almost half the season. That's 3 games right there. As we know, Nebraska has some positions that it's still trying to beef up depth-wise. I think outside linebackers is one of the obvious ones where you start looking at that group after the first 2 or 3 and you wonder, what that could look like. We still don't have a great sense of how the specialists are going to come together for Nebraska, an all-new group there. So, that was kind of the theme yesterday with the O-line too, right? Like they have bodies now, finally. It's not about the starters. It's about who else can fill in the event that they're needed extensively. Just a different kind of landscape for sure.
Yeah, the position that I asked Frost a couple questions about depth, and he actually sidestepped them fairly well while talking about broad strokes and, feeling about certain positions. Numerically, Nebraska has pretty good depth numerically, right? If you're just talking about numbers at positions.
Sure.
Now, the problem with some of it is that they don't have a lot of experience. They have experience on the offensive line. I think that's fair. A lot of those guys, even some of the backups, have played some snaps, like a guy like Brock Bando, a guy like Christian Gaylord has played some football. Max Sichterman's played drives in, 7-8 games. Bo Wilson, Trent Hickson, Cam Jurgens, they've all played quite a bit of football. So that's a position where you actually have numerical depth and then maybe some experience depth too. But then there's some other positions where numerically it looks good, but you don't really know what you're going to get consistently from those players until they actually do it. Running back is probably the one that jumps out the most to me, where you've got a guy like Dedrick Mills, and he's backed up by Ramir Johnson, who appeared in 4 games last year. Only 2 of those games was he prominent. And then everything else after that is a question mark until they prove it on the field, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it's interesting that so what's interesting is they have a lot of numbers, and Frost has done a good job of boosting up the roster from whatever it was, 130, 135, up to 155, with 154, which is where they are now. And they've kind of done that in certain positions, but at the same time, I think there's a challenge to get some of that numerical depth, some good experience, and get that this year, regardless of whether, you can't worry about whether it's going to cost you a game or not, because there's so many young players that you're going to have to play a lot of them anyway. And so I think this is probably one of those years where I don't want to call it a take a lump year in terms of playing young guys, because I don't think they have to take a big lump, but this is probably a year when you're going to see some guys who maybe wouldn't have played a lot in 2018 or 2019 if they had been here, but maybe playing quite a bit in 2020. And so it was striking to me that notion of, he's like, well, we feel better about the depth and the numbers have kind of come together, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's this sort of underlying idea just about where, certain positions are at because they haven't had positive tests at those positions. My sense is that, and I don't know this for sure, that you would look at this positions that had fewer numbers and you'd start getting into the positions where they haven't had any tests. I mean, it's probably not, I wouldn't think it would be the offensive line that hasn't had any positive tests. You know what I mean?
Sure.
That surprised me because there's, 30 of them. So if they went 0 for 30 there, that'd be quite a statistical anomaly. But then there's some other positions on the team where, again, you think of like a skill position, like a punt position or something like that, a special teams position where you don't want to see anybody get, you don't want to see anybody put in that spot. Nebraska went through a hellish nightmare at kicker as it was last year. And so you would not want to see a situation where Nebraska was I don't even know if having to ask, a backup linebacker to come and kick a 25-yard field goal to beat Northwestern again, like they did last year with Lane McKewon. So
right.
I think there's probably some challenges to navigate there. The 170 player cap is one thing. Maybe Nebraska can navigate that a little when guys are injured or if they're out. They probably obviously won't be taking the test because they won't be practicing. That can help them a little bit. And, if it's a 1-year deal where you're going from 154 down to 140, that's hard. That's tough. That's frustrating. I think Nebraska can manage and navigate that. It won't be perfect, but I think they can navigate it. Like if you're losing 15 to 20 walk-ons, who let's say were true freshmen or redshirt freshmen, you don't want that to happen, but at the same time, can you manage that? I think for 1 year with a shortened schedule, you may have to.
Yeah, I mean, it's just everything's just kind of coming together. You just got to kind of patch it together, right? Like it's if the price of playing football in 2020 is that you have to say to 20 or 30 guys they can't be part of the team this year. I mean, yeah, that's a tough series of conversations you have to have, but I mean it's something Nebraska would do, right? So the
have them doing other things or
sure.
working out somewhere else, or
the experience piece is interesting to me because 20 years ago, it was never a problem for Nebraska because they were blowing teams out and they were getting in their second and third units. And by the time guys became starters, they already had a lot of experience. But man, I mean, you look at the schedules and the games that Nebraska's played in the last handful of years, a lot of one possession games, a lot of nail biter type situations where guys were reserves are only getting opportunities in the occasional blowouts, but usually more so because of injuries. They were thrust into action. So, I think that's a fascinating thing to watch going forward as you have that 2019 class coming off the redshirt year, how you start integrating players a little bit more and getting that experience before they become prominent starters, because, the top teams in college football, right? Like when those positions come open and those guys become starters, they've already played extensively on special teams in a lot of cases. They've already logged meaningful minutes elsewhere. So it'll be interesting. And maybe the lack of a red shirt this year kind of opens up Nebraska a little bit to not worry about the 4-game thing and really just truly puts the guys out there that they feel good about. Maybe that'll make a difference too.
I think so. The thing that I suggested as a possibility is, a guy like Xavier Betts, who, might have been a 4-game guy if they had a 4-game deal going into this year, but Betts can catch footballs down the field. I mean, he's got great ability to stretch the field vertically. And so what maybe you do is, you give him an opportunity 5 times the season or 6 times this season in 6 different games to take a run at one. What's the harm? It's 2nd and 2 from the opponent's 47-yard line. Let's see if Xavier Betts can go up the sideline and pull one in for a big gain. I mean, that, it's pretty common for teams to try to do a house call once they get on the other side of the 50, especially in 2nd and short situations. And so, you'll take a run at a play like that, and that's not uncommon. And so I could see Xavier Betts in that situation. This maybe frees you up, for example, to, Edavamaga Clements, I think, has 2 years left, but technically he's got 3 now. Maybe this frees you up to put him on special teams, and you're not burning a year of his eligibility on specials. This way, you feel like, okay, we got an extra year with this guy who we think is going to be pretty dynamic on defense, but maybe he's not ready to do all the things we're asking him to do because he didn't get a spring camp. But we can play him on special teams, and he can run down there with his hair on fire and things like that. Or maybe there's a guy on special teams. There's a freshman who you can put out there that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise put on special teams that you just feel like can do some really special things for you on a coverage unit or a return unit or whatever. So, I would think that would be pretty beneficial to Nebraska, and because they were. How many times did we have this debate last year? Many, many times. I thought they were too conservative last season especially with Ramir Johnson, who I thought could have played a little bit more. I thought they were too conservative. I thought they probably should have played a few guys a little bit more and kind of got their feet wet and worry a little less about, whatever. But you thought it was really judicious for them to have saved the year. And as it stands now, I guess that's accurate because they didn't lose their year last year, and so now they're Luke McCaffrey is going to be a redshirt freshman for 3 years.
Yeah, I mean,
Luke McCaffrey is not going to be a sophomore until 2022. That's something.
The only
I'll tell you, he might be damn good too.
He might be.
Like, you give that guy a couple more years, he could be really, really good by 2022.
I would like to ask a couple of the 2020 guys, like, would they kind of a would they rather football edition of would you rather have lost your spring and maybe your summer acclimation period if it meant that you could not worry about redshirt restrictions and just potentially play half the season on special teams, or if you would rather have had that spring, if you were early enrolled, had that summer, and then maybe were limited to that handful of games. You redshirted, you did the scout team thing. I wonder which one guys would choose, because it seems like in the short term, I don't know. In the short term, it feels like kind of a wash because what you lose in the spring, you maybe make up for in that game experience. But then in the long term, you're going to have those extra snaps, pocketed, ready to go. So,
yeah.
I mean, I think what felt like it was crushing in the spring and in the summer and maybe cost Nebraska a couple players in terms of attrition. I don't know. In the long term, it might help start kind of jump starting this depth a little bit more than we thought.
It might. I think the best of all worlds is those redshirt freshmen because, again, they got all the practicing last year, and some of them got a spring, and then they played their 4 games. I mean, Luke McCaffrey felt like a part of Nebraska's football team last year, even though he only played 4. Mm-hmm. This year now becomes whatever you want to call it for Luke. And, he's going to challenge for the starting job. I understand all that. I get all that. I think Martinez is going to be the guy, and we can talk about that in a minute. But I think McCaffrey will be very poised to try to win the starting job in 2021. And then by 2022, it could be his team. So, and Logan Smothers has, that, I guess, that advantage too, although he didn't get much spring practice in. So, yeah, I think that's certainly an issue that's helpful for Nebraska. I thought Frost was pretty good today. Obviously a hard time for him. I think it's going to be one of these years where your head coach is bound up with so many other things that he wouldn't normally be bound up with. Your assistants and your coordinator really got to step up. And we heard from both of those this week. And Eric Shenander was the first coordinator we heard from on Tuesday with Nebraska's defense. And I was curious what you got out of not only his comments, but maybe the comments of some of the assistant coaches, that being Travis Fisher and Mike Dawson and JoJo Doman and Deontay Williams.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I mean, until this week, I think it had been since Frost's June Zoom press conference that we'd actually had any Nebraska football conversation in terms of positions and depth and actual players. So it was really refreshing, and I appreciated your story, Sam, about Shenander, the teacher. Like, these coordinators, unlike the head coach, aren't bound by kind of what's going on with the Big Ten or testing protocols. I mean, it affects them, but that's not something that they're engaged in regular dialogue with. So it was refreshing, I thought, to hear from all those guys, hear about their perspectives relating to their positions, relating to the defense. I thought Shenander had a good point about just how hard it's been not seeing these guys. He said, leadership is a contact sport. I hadn't really considered that from that perspective, but just that idea that, these coaches are working through just as many, I'm sure more Zooms than we are, remote challenges, things like that, things that educators all over the country are working through too. But, I don't know that there were a ton of positional revelations as far as defense. For me, I think we kind of had a sense of what the secondary was going to be like. I think we had a sense of the linebackers, and we really haven't maybe gotten a ton of clarity on the defensive line and maybe how that'll look. I think we have our ideas of what maybe that 6 to 8 man rotation would look like. But just, I think it'll be fascinating because it seems like part of the struggles for Nebraska the last couple of years on defense has been kind of the mental side of it, understanding what your assignments are, what gap you need to fit. There have been a lot of mental mistakes that have cost Nebraska. And so maybe a silver lining from this extra time has been that, man, they've really had time to hammer down the mental side. They haven't had the physical stuff. They haven't had the pads until this week, but I'll be really fascinated to see year 3 in the scheme, the extra time, how that maybe translates to a little bit more reliability and maybe a little bit, a closer manifestation of what Shenander and that defense are looking for.
That's a good thought, Evan. So I've been going back through some of the games that Nebraska's played last year. Not as so much in 2018, but definitely last year. One thing that I would say is that Nebraska played. They had a lot of games in their front seven. In other words, blitzes, twists. Not pre-snap shifts. They didn't do much of that at all. Slants, different approaches to trying to stop plays. And, I have to be honest, it didn't always work. It was a lot of sound and fury, and it didn't add up to a stopped play. And I'm talking mostly about the run. I think in the pass game, it has its moments, that kind of stuff. But when it came to the run game, I think Nebraska tried to do a lot of different things in stopping the run and moving defensive linemen this way or that way, and linebackers coming over, or linebackers blitzing, or guys twisting. And, sometimes it got a TFL and sometimes it left guys out of position. And it kind of indicated to me that they didn't feel like maybe they had always the horses physical. As good as Carlos and Khalil Davis were, they weren't necessarily classic 3-4 defensive linemen. And it kind of made you wonder if they felt like they had the horses physically to really play the sort of head-up 3-4 defense that you want to play. Watching that Minnesota game again partially today, and you're just like, I don't know if you got the players to kind of do this thing right now, or the linebackers or whatever you want to call it, because Minnesota was not complex in its offensive scheme. They weren't doing a lot of odd, out of the box stuff. They were running their offense, and Nebraska really struggled to just fit gaps and do things like that. And I think that concern still lingers into this season. We didn't hear a lot about the defensive line on Tuesday. Chinander was asked more about other positions. He was asked more about the big picture. So we can ask Chinander a little bit more about that next week. But we didn't hear a ton about the defensive line. We heard from outside linebackers coach Mike Dawson, who, is just beginning the process of coaching that group. JoJo Doman, Caleb Tanner, Garrett Nelson, and who knows what else. There's no way to know. And 3 guys aren't enough. And out of those 3 guys, Doman's a playmaker. At times he made plays for the other team by being out of position. Tanner has not been a consistent playmaker. And Garrett Nelson was young. He ran around with his head on fire and played very hard, but there were times, I think, when he was out there because they didn't feel like they had better options. And so I think Nelson will get better. Tanner has to, because again, the physicality and or speed or physical quotient there just wasn't very consistent in 2019. And you're going to get plays out of Doman. You just got to make sure he's making all those plays for your team and not getting you out of position. That's a position of concern. Still think like inside linebacker is a concern. I understand that Colin Miller and Will Honus are very experienced players, but you could watch those guys last year, and they weren't perfect. Still feel like the defensive line, we don't really know that much. I think I could tell you the 6 to 8 players that might rotate. I don't know which ones will start, and B, how good they're going to be. And I think that's something that they're going to get trial by fire, right? Because they're going to play Ohio State and Wisconsin, maybe the league's 2 best rushing teams in the first game. Wisconsin won't be as good as they were last year running the ball because they don't have Jonathan Taylor, but that's a pretty good bunch that you're going to be facing early in the season. So we'll find out a lot there. And then the secondary, Braxton Clark is out for the season, or maybe out for the season, with a shoulder injury, and that makes an already thin position at corner even thinner because DiCaprio Boodle and Cam Taylor-Britt are probably your starting corners. And then after that, you got Nadab Joseph and Quentin Newsom. And after that,
Delancey, probably.
Ronald Delancey.
Yeah.
And at safety, you've got Deontay Williams and Markel Dismuke and Miles Farmer and Noah Pola Gates. You're pretty good there. And Pola Gates can play maybe a little bit of nickel. But, man, and nobody can get hurt. Because Clark was going to be a part of their plans this year, and that departure, that injury hurts them. It only magnifies the departures of Gray and Francois too, because you're at a point now where you're basically down 3 guys you thought you were going to have, and you're up 1 guy in Nadab Joseph who you added over the summer. So you're kind of a net negative 2. And if you want to include Newsom, you can, but back in the spring they thought they were going to have Newsom too. So that's a unit that probably can't afford any injuries.
Yeah, probably not, but it is a good unit. Like all those guys that you mentioned could be really good players. Like I don't know that you can say that about a lot of the positions defensively necessarily for Nebraska. Like all those guys I could see being pretty good. And then it's also, noteworthy that they cross-train these guys. Travis Fisher does. So like in the spring, Deontay Williams was playing some corner and could do so if necessary. I mean, last year we saw it wasn't ideal certainly, but we saw Boodle playing some safety. We saw
Boodle was okay
playing some safety. We saw guys moving around, and so
Boodle was okay. I think Cam Taylor-Britt is a terrific athlete that you want closer to the ball than further away.
You want him as a corner, no doubt.
Yeah, well, whatever.
Nickel,
closer to the ball than further away. If he's a nickel slot or whatever you want to call it, but I don't. When he's 15 yards off the ball, that doesn't seem to be his wheelhouse. Boodle actually was I think he was pretty good at both positions. Now, DiCaprio Boodle's only so big, so he can't. He's not Jamal Adams back there, but Boodle's so smart, and he's usually in pretty good spot. So, I think in the NFL, Boodle would have to probably play corner, but he's fine. I think the question mark is how you toggle. Well, what happens at corner if somebody gets hurt, and who plays the corner that Braxton Clark was going to play, which was to replace Lamar Jackson. Can you play Cam Taylor-Britt there? Can he run stride for stride with receivers like Rashad Bateman? Or is it Nadab Joseph? You just don't know. Like that's a question now. You don't want DiCaprio Boodle on Rashad Bateman. I don't think you do. I think you want DiCaprio moving somewhere else. But we saw what happened when Laviska Shenault was on Boodle or some of these bigger guys. They can body him up, and I think what you want is a guy that can stride and run, and maybe that's Joseph, maybe it's Taylor-Britt. I don't know. I just don't know. I could see Cam Taylor-Britt one day playing more of a not Doman-esque role, but like a star role that they call in some of their defenses. Penn State as a star back. Ideally, I think if you got to the point where Cam Taylor-Britt was like a 5-year guy because he's not going to lose a year of eligibility this year, it'd be fun to see him in a role where he's kind of a nickel and he's able to play in the box and kind of a Dejon Gomes or Eric Hake role.
See, I wonder if Nebraska won't do that with him this year. Like, I get the sense that they like moving him around a little bit.
You gotta have Nadab Joseph be good.
Yeah, him or Newsom.
Newsom.
Yeah, one of those guys.
One or the other, and they got to be good. Like this isn't your granddad's Big Ten. My Big Ten column for tomorrow is hello Rondale Moore, Rashad Bateman, Chris Olave, Josh Imitor Bebe. These guys can play ball. I mean, they have great receivers in this league. Much better receivers this year than they do running backs. So you just can't hide. You can hide it against Northwestern, but Imitor Bebe or Bateman, and those guys are going to go for 150 if you don't cover them right. They're NFL guys. They're going to be second, third round guys. Yeah. Moore is a first rounder. So I mean, you don't F around with those guys. You have to play them. And we saw what happened against Purdue last year. Braxton Clark played in that game. Cam Taylor-Britt did not. Purdue was open. Those guys were open, and they're good. They're good players. So it's going to be challenging. Let's move on to the offense. I'll start here. First of all, I think Matt Lubick is a real details guy. So he's fascinated by sort of the intricacies of practice regimen and sort of tweaking certain things. I think he's got a real good vision of we need to simplify the offense and dial it into what works. I think Austin was on the exact same page. Execute what you can do really well, get really good at that, and then start building outward versus let's put in this big buffet of an offense and try to do this and try to do this and try to do this. That's kind of the Mike Riley approach. I think it was a little bit of the Troy Walters approach. And if there's one thing that was true under Danny Langsdorf and Troy Walters is that Nebraska could not consistently run that inside zone play. Whether they were doing it from under center, under Danny Langsdorf, or they were doing it out of the shotgun with Walters, they weren't consistently being able to run that sort of bread and butter play where you want to get 4 or 5 yards and kind of push the pile. You're not necessarily going to break a big run, but they didn't always do it. That was one issue that they had, I think. I think they're probably going to streamline that and say, hey, we're going to run the football downhill, and we're going to run it with our big, strong running backs. Dedrick Mills, Ronald Tompkins, Marvin Scott. Sevion Morrison's not a small guy. He's like 6'1", 6'2", 210. They're going to run the ball downhill with their big dudes. And they're going to get between the tackles, and they're going to try to outmuscle teams. Now, Ohio State, you got to get cuter with Ohio State. So they're almost an exception to the rule. But, they found a way to run the ball against Wisconsin last year for almost 300 yards. So they can run the ball on anybody. But they have to have a will to do it, and they got to have a passion for it, and they have to execute it. And so I think the thing that you heard from Lubick and from Austin is this notion of, we've got to make sure that our players know what they're doing and can execute it. the thing that we heard from Lubick in the past game is we got to get better around Adrian Martinez, and we have to make things, and remember this word, easy for him in terms of decision making. That doesn't mean that Martinez isn't smart. I think Martinez is smart, but I think at times last season, the picture got a little bit muddy because guys weren't getting open, and B, I felt like Martinez was looking for the home run ball, and he's got a tight end, 12 yards down the field who's probably open. And they've got to get more to a point where you're able to walk away from that deep ball to J.D. Spielman against Purdue, because you've got a guy running a drag route across the flat and it's 1st and 10 and you don't need to score a touchdown. Get the 5, then go for the score, whatever. That situational stuff that I think Lubick will help them work through. They just got to get more efficient at throwing the ball. And then they got to get better at executing what happens after the ball leaves Adrian Martinez's hands. Guy catches the football, he's getting downfield blocks if it's a quick throw. A guy's turning and running where he needs to. I think that detailing portion declined under Walters. I think Keith Williams was probably better at those details from a route running perspective and from a here's how you detail out a route perspective. I think Ted Gilmore back in the day was better at that, for example. And then between Gilmore and Williams, you had a little bit different approach. And then I think between Williams and now Lubick, there was a little bit of a different approach too. And I think Lubick is closer to what Williams or Gilmore was in terms of teaching those details on how to run a route and how to run it at full speed and where to go and how to cut it and all that. Because I thought a lot of times last year, Nebraska's routes looked a little rounded off and they looked a little like, I'm just trying to get to a place that seems open versus I'm getting to a place where that seems open as fast and as efficient as I can. And I think Nebraska's offense will look better and crisper because you're going to get a little bit better execution from the players regardless of the play they're running.
Yeah, I felt like Thursday's talk with the offensive coaches and players just kind of reinforced that the moves they made, in my opinion, in the offseason made a lot of sense. I mean, you make Greg Austin your run game coordinator, which really, I think, kind of brings into focus what you're saying, this idea that, yeah, Nebraska can hang its hat on running the ball at times. And I often think of that Purdue game and what Austin said in the spring about that, about how, they punched it in late and they got cute early and tried that little inside pass to Wandale, I think it was, or Jack Stoll. And then almost, it was kind of a disaster and people get upset about that. So I think he kind of brings a hard-nosed kind of common sense approach that's really going to help them. And then, yeah, I mean, of all the times to bring in a guy like Matt Lubick, this feels like just an ideal time, partly for what we were saying earlier about, everything going on with this weird 2020 season and how that's going to pull your head coach's focus in all these directions. I mean, Lubick is a guy who is just absolutely comes across as laser focused, detail oriented. All the players say that it's about running, more efficient routes. It's about just being detailed in your work, whatever it is, footwork, different things like that. I just think he's going to be really ideal for that offense. You hear him talking through even just their approach for the next few weeks, how they need to get in different situational scrimmage reps and things like that. Like, this is someone who knows, who's 95% aligned with what Scott Frost wants to do on offense. There's a shorthand between those guys that I think is going to come in especially handy this year. And then, I think his take on the struggles of Adrian Martinez last year were right on. And that, yeah, I mean, sometimes he missed his guys, but how many of these receivers weren't getting open? How often did the snap from a guy who hadn't played center before affect things? There were just a lot of different things that went into why that offense struggled. And now that they've had an offseason plus a few months to work through this thing, it really feels like this thing could be more efficient as they move forward.
Yeah, and how do I put this? Like, the things that they've got to get, there's a combination of pieces there. A lot of times when you look at offense, you can focus on two things. One, you can focus on the quarterback play. And there's legitimate stuff there with any quarterback. The other thing you look at a lot is play calling, because there is something to be said for finding the right play in the right moment. Everybody kind of falls all over, rightly so, Andy Reid for being able to find that and be able to design these plays that are just sort of genius, you know? And when he runs them with the Kansas City Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes, they don't look risky. Like Kansas City runs a 2-yard shovel pass to a fullback, and it doesn't look like they can't run the ball. It looks like that was really sharp. Some of that is the kind of practice and that they get at the NFL level can help them to sharpen and hone those things. But the things that I think are really important at the collegiate level are the execution piece, and then do you have the players that can do the things you want to do on the field? And I think they're further along in that front, and I think the execution piece is going to be the thing that you've got to watch the closest. The throw game is – they've got to get some guys in the throw game that can catch a football in the back of the stinking end zone. And I think they've got that now. You know, somebody you can say, hey, run back line, let's catch one at the goal post, let Adrian throw the dang thing high instead of having to throw, to a 5'9" Spielman on a fade route. Let him throw it to somebody who's big. That kind of thing. Or, you've got a short side fade route you want to throw, and you've got a big physical guy like Omar Manning out there, where all you really need to do is kind of throw it closer to the pylon and let him body up a corner and grab it and spin into the end zone. So those pieces were important, but I think the execution piece, especially in the run game, like you said, they just got to get better there, because there's so many times last season where you're like, this is close to breaking through. But man, if they can't turn that 2-yard play into a 5-yard play. So many times they were, 2nd and 9 instead of 2nd and 6. And there's a big difference in those 3 yards. It's people shouldn't overlook it. I get a better vibe out of the Nebraska offense than I do the defense. I thought, last year was about the defense. I thought the offense was actually I said this a couple of different times, I thought it was going to be a little bit whatever at times. I thought it was going to be about the defense. I thought the offense was going to be good, but I thought the defense needed to be good. And, there were times when the defense was not good. This year I feel like the offense has got to carry the day, and that defense it's got to play as well as it can. But I am hard pressed to think at this moment that Nebraska's defense is going to be as good. It's going to be maybe it'll be statistically better. It's possible. But, they're playing all Big Ten teams. They're not going to play any rummies. So it's hard to see a statistical improvement, especially when you're playing Ohio State and Wisconsin out of the gate. It just seems tough. So your offense better be ready, have the tank loaded and ready to score 30. If you're gonna be winning a whole bunch of games this season. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but it just feels like that at this particular moment.
No, I agree. I mean, you can just go down the line on offense. Like your quarterback's a third-year starter. Your O-line has experience. The guys that you brought in at receiver seemingly are difference makers. Your tight ends are experienced. Like, all these guys know the scheme by now. They've got the mental part down. If you talk to the coaches or some of the players, I mean, they've had the time to do that. So now's the time, right? Like, yeah, you're playing big
starting running back too.
Yeah, Mills is good. He really came on late. But yeah, I mean, flip that over to the defense, and even the positions that I think should be pretty good, like in the secondary, not a lot of depth. There's not a lot of margin for error. I think they have some decent starting linebackers, but not a lot of depth. We have no idea what the line's going to look like necessarily. So, like, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty on that defensive side. We know that they like to go for the tackles for loss and put an emphasis on, trying for those turnovers as well. So they're going to get burned. The offense is going to have to make up for it. We'll see if they can. And I agree. Like, if you're not scoring, what was the magic number Frost had said a year or two ago? 30. Was that 30 points, something like that?
30 was last year, and if they'd done that a couple of times, they would have won some games. But
yeah,
or 35 or 31 or
right. And
I think
it feels like they're going to need to hit the over on that for this to be a successful season.
Or you've got to alter the way you run, and I don't think they're going to do that. I don't think they're going to change the way they manage a game,
Right.
where they slow everything down and say, all right, we're comfortable winning 24-21, and we're going to slow our offense down accordingly to protect our defense. I just don't think I think their mantra is we're going to run plays, we're going to run them fast, we're going to move up and down the field, and in doing that, we're going to set a culture and a standard that we think will carry on for years to come. And the problem is that when you run that kind of offense, you leave your defense vulnerable. Oklahoma learned that the hard way against Kansas State. Their offense went into a shell for the last quarter and a half, and Kansas State won the game because Oklahoma cannot slow down, and they won't slow down. And they put their quarterback in shitty spots multiple times in that game, and it was the fault of the coach. You've got a lead of 21, then 14, then 7, then 3. I can't remember how the numbers went. Then 0. Then you're down by 3, and you really can't find a way to establish a run game with a zone read or with the running back downhill. You can't take 5 or 6 minutes off a clock and ice a hot quarterback. They just don't know how to do it, or they don't want to do it. And as a result, they lost. And Nebraska doesn't have the luxury of playing Kansas State 9 times. They're going to play 5 or 6 teams that are better than K-State. So, and they don't have as many good players as Oklahoma does on offense. Well, they might this year, but I've made my point. Yeah, we'll see what next week brings. I assume we'll hear from the quarterback's coach and the running back's coach next week. I assume that we'll hear from the defensive line coach and the inside linebackers coach next week. Really want to hear from Tony Tuioti. I think that's an important guy to talk to, and really interested to hear from Ryan Held at running back, because I think at this moment Dedrick Mills is in that top 5 or 6 players on the team where, like, the guy can't get hurt because I just don't know what you got after him in terms of experience and know-how and all of those little things. Can we talk a little hoops real quick?
Yeah, please.
Cool.
Big recruit.
Yeah, Wilhelm Breidenbach. He's 6'9", from Santa Ana, California, Mater Dei High School. He's got an inside game. He's a center. He said they want him to play inside out, which is to say, he can score inside the 3-point line, but he's got a 3-point shot that extends beyond, that can extend a defense. I don't know that Fred Hoiberg is going to be recruiting a lot of guys who can't shoot the 3, although he's got 2 guys on the team, Ivan Ouedraogo and Eduardo Andre, who I would not describe as 3-point shooters, and Derek Walker isn't much either. So they do like big guys that are traditional sort of brawlers and mashers. I think you need those in the Big Ten. I don't think you can just not have those guys on your roster. And so Nebraska's got a few of those, but I think this particular recruit is somebody who can go out and hit a 3-pointer and can get better and better and better at that shot. And Nebraska hasn't had, I don't know, ideally, this is a high bar. Ideally, you would like him to be as good as Isaac Copeland was for a year and a half in Nebraska. That's a high bar. Isaac Copeland was a very good player at Nebraska. And so, and he was a 5-star recruit at one time out of high school. So Copeland, I think, would be, a challenge to match. But if Breidenbach got that good, that would be great. I think that would be something that they would love to see. Or a Wes Wilkinson. I'm sure you remember Wes. He became a very good 3-point shooter, I think, the last year or 2 of his career at Nebraska. And he was a guy that, again, if you were looking for a positive comp for Breidenbach, that's someone you might look at. Maybe a Brian Conklin, although Conklin was more of a 3-point sharpshooter. So there's some guys that I think you're looking at. He is the second highest commit in the recruiting service era, second highest rated commit. He's either number 1 if you look at ESPN, or he's number 2 if you look at 247 Sports. Glenn Watson would be number one if you look at 247 Sports. And, of course, we always say the recruiting service era because Nebraska did get some basketball recruits in the 1990s who I would describe as 5 stars. So Andre Woolridge was a 5-star recruit. Now, he wasn't – they didn't have services back then, so you don't really know exactly how to manage what you call that number. But I think Woolridge was, one of the top 20 or 25 players in the country. So you always go with the recruiting service designation. Nevertheless, pretty impressive that they would be able to get this kid away from California. He had good offers out on the West Coast. He also had a Marquette offer. Marquette's a good basketball program. I think everybody would agree. But he picked Nebraska. And I think that's a feather in Fred Hoiberg's cap because that's a guy that, I don't think you just that guy just falls to you. I think you have to work pretty hard to land him. And so that's one of the better recruits that I think they've landed since they've gotten here.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you look at, some of the misses they've had. It seems like they've been in the final 2 or 3 for so many guys in the last cycle or two, just to see them slip away for whatever reason at the last minute to land this guy at a position of need. And is, anyone who follows Nebraska basketball knows that it's been hard finding good big men for this program for a long time. So you bring in somebody like that who can, stretch the floor a little bit potentially as a bonus. Like that's a great ad. And for someone, who can play in Fred Hoiberg's kind of up-tempo offense, it should be a lot of fun if he can develop that range a little bit.
Yeah, I'm pro Ivan though. I mean, he had a good freshman year. When all things considered, when you look at all the things he had to adjust to, coming to a new country, playing in a new system where everyone was new, playing on a team where he probably had to cut some weight, and he has. So he's a kind of a different guy this year. I think he played hard, and I think they've got a building block there with him. But you're right. I mean, Nebraska, if you look back at the long, painful journey of big men, Nebraska had a great run of big men in the mid 80s and the late 80s and the early 90s, right? So they had Dave Hoppen, and then they got Rich King, and then they had Derek Chandler. I don't know if you remember Derek Chandler.
I don't.
But he was good. Tony Farmer, DePriest Owens. These were good players. I mean, they were big. They were legitimate Big 8 men who could rebound and run and shoot and all kinds of stuff. And so a lot of those players were really, really good. And then, and a lot of that was because of an assistant coach they had. And then Vincent Hamilton obviously was the Big 12 Player of the Year in 1999. And then Danny Nee was fired, and Jimmy Williams, the assistant coach that got a lot of these big men, Mikey Moore was another one, he left. And in his departure, they didn't have another good big man until Alex Marich, who was a Scott Spinelli recruit. And then, Doc, frankly, struggled a little bit to get that player. And they ran through some guys, too. They tried Shung Ping. Remember Shung?
Oh, yeah.
Alex Chapman, Christopher Neiman. Jorge Brian Diaz was not bad. Andre Almeida, he was big.
He was big.
He was a big guy. But they struggled a little bit there. And then, in the Tim Miles era, they tried with a couple of different guys. I know they had a guy from Sergey Vucetic, I think. He left pretty quickly. Who am I forgetting here? Best guy they had was Leslie Smith. And he was like a transfer from SMU, and he got hurt. Dubio KK. Moses Abraham, Moses Iegba. And then they had a guy that left really quickly. I don't know. So if you just look at all the names that have and then Jordy Shamanga was a disappointment. I mean, I think everybody kind of thought Jordy was going to be the guy. And, Jordy turned out to be a guy that was very disappointing because he left and then he came back and then he left. And that was pretty frustrating to a lot of different people. And so it feels like they now have some big guys in their program that, can sustain for a while. I think Ivan's going to be there a while, and I think Derek Walker's going to be in the program for a couple of years, and I think Wilhelm Breedenbach's going to be there a while, and that's good. Like, I think you need to have that player, especially in the Big Ten.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying you got to have Luka Garza. You don't have to have Luka Garza to succeed in the Big Ten. A lot of teams succeed in the Big Ten without that guy. But at the same time, you better have players who can do some of that stuff in the paint against the bruisers. Rutgers is a bruising team. Penn State's kind of a bruiser. So you better have some guys that can kind of bang around. And I actually think Nebraska does. And I think they're going to be okay there. The other thing we heard last week was Kobe Webster and Teddy Allen. They talked a little bit on Wednesday just about where the team's at. What I wrote for the first story was about the team chemistry and how, interestingly enough, the protocols that Nebraska put in place in order to get the football team back helped the basketball team get back too. And as a result, some of those guys were here over the summer and they just got the bond over, honestly, talking about social justice issues. I think that's part of how it started. They had yogas on Wednesdays, and then they'd have a meeting about Black Lives Matter and racial issues. And I think not every player was there because I think a couple were still in their home countries, but there were quite a few guys. And I think as a result, they kind of started to grow and bond in ways that maybe, teams that were still off site over the summer because of the coronavirus did not. And so I think they did a pretty good job of kind of building it. And so I think there's a chemistry within that room, that program right now. Maybe they didn't have last year. I think Kobe Webster's a pretty vocal and unselfish guy. I'm not saying that Kobe Webster won't play pro basketball, but I don't know that I would describe him as fixated on that as perhaps a couple of the guards Nebraska had last year who are no longer here. Like, I think he's kind of a glue in a way that maybe some other players weren't. And then Teddy Allen, I think the one thing everybody knows about Teddy, and I don't know him as well as Chris did or Mike Sauter does, but the one thing about Teddy that's true is that Teddy will work hard and he'll play hard and he cares and he wants to be good at basketball and he wants other guys to be good at basketball and he's got a good basketball IQ. And so I think Teddy functions really well on a team that works and plays hard, and I think they do. I think there's a real sense of camaraderie there around the work ethic piece. And then for the Monday Rewind, I'll talk a little bit more about some of the other things I think that Kobe Webster talked about in terms of offense, and Teddy Allen talked about in terms of defensive length, which is an important thing because Nebraska's defense last year left a lot to be desired. And even if you perfect Fredo Hoiberg's offense, it doesn't mean you can't play D. You still got to play D. And I think at times last year their defense wasn't good enough. They know that. And I think they have improved the caliber of defender by improving the length of those defenders, especially on the perimeter.
How about their leadership? I mean, we've talked about how under Tim Miles, his personality kind of sucked all the energy out of the players, so to speak, a little bit, where Miles was clearly the guy. And it didn't feel like last year's team had that guy or those guys who were maybe pushing the team. Maybe it was the guys who were transferring and sitting out. But do you get a sense that this team will have a little bit more of player leadership, whether that came out through the social justice time they had together, or do you feel like it'll be more of the same?
No, I think what you're going to see is that Kobe Webster is going to take a big leadership role. He's a senior. He played a couple of years at 3 years at Western Illinois. He's a point guard. He's different than Glenn Watson, and Glenn was an enormously talented player who had a lot to do with Nebraska's success in Miles' final 2 years. And you can't say enough about how hard Glenn Watson worked and all of those things. But Glenn was not, an alpha guy, and Kobe is. Kobe is a point guard. In other words, he's going to be a leader. Even if he averages 9 points, 6 assists, he's going to be the leader and wants to be the leader, and isn't content kind of staying in the background. If you look at the teams that Glenn was on, pretty clear that the leaders there were James Palmer, Copeland, and whoever, gosh, I wish I could remember his name. The guy that was there is Glenn's junior year, but wasn't there the senior year, who I can't place right off the top of my head. So they had some other guys that maybe were kind of taking a little bit of that leadership piece. I think with this team, it's going to be Webster. And, again, Allen is not a guy that I think you can really suppress. He's going to play the game out loud. He's going to play the game with emotion. What you want to do is you want to channel that in the right direction, and you want to put players around him who care and work as hard as he does. And because Allen's going to be a good player. I mean, short of injuries, which you never want to see, Teddy Allen's going to score. He's going to work hard. He's going to be a challenging player to cover. I don't know if he's going to be as good of a scorer as James Palmer, but I tell you, he's got the ability to be as good of a scorer as James Palmer. So what you want to do is surround him with players who are like-minded and want to play really hard. And, hopefully they can – I think they feel like they can do that. It's going to drive me batty to not know who that player was on the 22 win team. So I'm going to look that up real quick. You can talk.
This is great podcast material right here.
Oh, shush.
Typing up.
Hey, this is what podcasts are for. That's what they're for. All right, let me give you the name of this guy because he was Evan Taylor and Anton Gill. So do you remember those two guys?
Sure, yeah.
So those two guys, I think, played a bigger leadership role than Glenn Watson did on that 22-win team. And because if you remember, I'm pretty confident Gill and I think Taylor were the two guys that were kind of behind the hate will never win campaign for Nebraska. Mm-hmm. I think those were the two guys that kind of said it. And then of course Isaiah Roby was still there, and there were other things, but yeah, I would say that Kobe Webster is in that, is probably more in that Anton Gill leadership role. And you know what? I should be fair. Glenn, I do remember because I was at that press conference. Glenn was there too. Glenn was part of that. He was part of that group as well. So he was leading in that way as well. I think Evan Taylor was leading in that way. So to be fair to Glenn, he was part of that. But I just think Kobe Webster is going to be a little bit more of a vocal leader than Watson was. Don't know if he's going to be as good of a player. Glenn was a terrific player. But I think that's a piece. And then you always know what you're going to get out of Thor, and I think that's good. And Derek Walker, I think people like him, Shamil Stevenson, these guys are hungry. They're hungry. That's part of it. Delano Banton, Shamil Stevenson, and Derek Walker set out for a year. They're going to come in hungry. They're going to be really hungry because they didn't get to play basketball last year for a team. I mean, they played in practice. Trey McGowan's is going to be hungry. Kobe Webster's hungry. He didn't come to Nebraska to have the same kind of seasons that he had at Western Illinois, and they weren't very good there. Teddy Allen, I mean, he's going to be voracious in his hunger. Like, this is a group of guys that have a lot to prove. And so I think as a result, sometimes you kind of wear that a little bit and you're like, look, we're not doing anybody, like we want to prove something by being here. And, we're going to do that. So I think that's kind of where they're at. Ready to do some picks?
Yeah. Let's roll.
So I'm up 3.
Comeback time.
Struggling. There's some on here that are, not very hard, but then there's a couple where you're just kind of like, oh, maybe. I think all these games are still on as far as I know. You ready?
Let's do it.
Texas A&M and Alabama.
Give me Alabama.
I'll take Alabama as well. Navy at Air Force. First game for Air Force. I think that game is this weekend.
Yeah, yep. It's like one of the hottest tickets in college football. Air Force.
AFA. First game, I'm going to take Navy. I think it's going to be hard. They play very similar offenses, but I got a hunch it's going to be Navy because it's that first game situation. Texas Tech at Kansas State. I'm going to take K-State.
Boy, I'll go Tech.
Tech it is. Baylor, West Virginia. Give me West Virginia at home.
I'll take Baylor.
South Carolina at Florida, the Will Muschamp Bowl.
Florida.
I'll take Florida. I think Florida's pretty good. Texas San Antonio at UAB. I'll take UAB.
Same. Dragons.
Yeah. Memphis at SMU. Memphis has been off for many weeks. I think SMU has too. Memphis.
I'll go SMU.
No. TCU at Texas. Give me Texas.
Yep, Texas.
Oklahoma at Iowa State. Give me OU and give me OU big. How's that sound?
Yeah, Sooners are not happy. Oklahoma.
I think it's going to be, 21 points. Iowa State picked them at the wrong time. North Carolina at Boston College.
Give me North Carolina.
We'll take Jeff Hafley and BC. What about that?
How about that?
Auburn at Georgia. I'll take UGA.
Same.
And then our two NFL games. We have a bunch that we disagree on this week. It should be fun.
Yeah.
Pats, Chiefs. How about those Chiefs?
Can't go against the Chiefs.
Yeah.
Pains me to say it every week.
Ooh, they're fun to watch.
They are.
Your team sucks.
Yeah, Denver's not good.
Oh, Evan. I was yelling at the TV last night. Do you know how badly they mismanaged that fourth quarter?
They won the game. Yeah, it was ugly.
I told my wife, Molly, at the beginning of the fourth quarter, I'm like, now this is a time when a quarterback, and she would back this up, this is a time when a young quarterback who's starting to feel himself because he threw a touchdown is going to do something stupid. So the coaching staff has to make sure that they don't – you're up 8. You're up 8 points. You have to make Sam Darnold drive the field and get a two-pointer in order to tie you. Run the ball, get to 3rd and 3, and then give him easy throws. And what do? He throws a pick 6, and then he throws another pick. And they still managed to win.
Jets are terrible. Yeah, that was –
they won because of a goofy face mask call. That was why they won. Which is too bad. I mean, Vic Fangio, man, I don't know. I'm just telling you right now.
He's your boy.
Well, he was fine he was fine when he was a defensive coordinator. Denver's got to stop hiring defensive coordinators to be their head coach so John Elway can run the offense.
You're not wrong.
It's time to hire an offensive head coach again and get John Elway out of the offensive game planning. Because he's not picking the right – anyway, Browns and Cowboys, I got to stay loyal to my wife. Brownies.
Give me the Cowboys, yeah.
I think you're going to win that one. I gave you a free one right there, but gosh darn it. I can't wait to see the Brownies try to beat them. All right, everybody, that's our podcast for this week. We'll be back next week with, well, God knows what. But we'll talk more football next week, I'm sure. Maybe there'll be other adventures to get into. Hope everyone stays safe out there. Do what you got to do to stay away from COVID because it's everywhere. And there's ways to stop it from happening, and I hope you find those ways. Thanks a lot, Husker fans.